Good morning, everybody. We are going to be doing a SiteVision Visualization Manager webinar today with all of you. Thanks again for joining us today. And this should be pretty good. We've got Miko Ramos, who's going to go over the SiteVision and the Visualization Manager workflow with SiteVision. So my name's Adam Wright. Again, we've got Miko Ramos joining us. We anticipate about a 45-minute webinar, and that should leave us some time at the end, 10 or 15 minutes for question and answer. So throughout the webinar, we'll try to answer some of your questions. If there's anything left over, we will try to answer those questions offline if we have to do so. The webinar will be sent out 24 hours after this broadcast. So you can rewatch that, or if you've missed the webinar, you get a chance to watch it. Other housekeeping items, you will be in listen-only mode so that Miko can present. And again, welcome. Thanks for joining. Looking forward to a great little webinar here. Miko.
All right, thank you, Adam. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are. My name is Miko Ramos. I'm the product management intern for Geospatial Field Solutions, and today I'm here to present to you something on SiteVision Visualization Manager. Hopefully everyone's staying safe and at home in these very interesting times. So in that case, today we'll be going over some of the software side of SiteVision instead, just so you have something to do while you're all cooped up safely at home. So what we're going to start with is we're going to go over the basics of SiteVision Visualization Manager, or SVM for short, because that's quite a mouthful. We'll start with what it is, how to download and install, and then what we'll do is we will do a live workflow in ESRI ArcMap where we create a data set based on some sample data that's already provided for free. So we'll create a rules file, define different ways to show points and lines, create powerful rules that help sort of show how SiteVision Visualization Manager works and what it can do. And we'll finish off with exporting to SiteVision, either via Trimble Connect or via local device. So for those unfamiliar, what SVM is this is a free standalone software for Windows 10 only, which to help you customize how GIS data is viewed in SiteVision. And what this does, it uses feature classes and attributes from your model data, such as your shapefiles, your geodatabases, to fundamentally change how they're viewed in SiteVision. And what this does is it doesn't alter the model data itself, but it exports a rules.json file that accompanies your model data. And what SiteVision will do is once it detects the presence of this JSON file, or sorry, the rules file next to your model data, it'll apply all of the rules that we create here straight onto your model data itself. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to start with how to install it. So what you're going to do is you're going to go to the Trimble SiteVision website. So that's sitevision.trimble.com. You'll go under resources, then support. Let that load. And then once you're here in the SiteVision Support Center, scroll down and you'll want these two things. So the SiteVision Visualization Manager and also sample rules files. So we'll be making our own rules file in this particular webinar, but in here you have both 7 different rules files that show you all the different aspects of Visualization Manager, sort of in a do-it-yourself kind of way. And there's also a sample data set in here, which is 4 shapefiles from Christchurch, New Zealand, which we'll actually be using here today. So once you get those downloaded and installed, what I'll do is I'll hop into ArcMap. And this is our GIS data. So this is the sample data that you'll get from the, where is it? That you'll get from the sample rules files right here. And what we'll do before we hop into Visualization Manager is we'll take a quick look at all the different feature classes and attributes in this particular data. So what this is some utilities data from our Trimble office in New Zealand, from the Christchurch City Council. So what we have here is, first we have a lot of points. So this is the water points layer, and we have a specific attribute here called feature type. The reason it's sort of concatenated like that is because ArcMap only limits attribute names to about 10 characters or less. So if you see any like funky character names, that might be why. And each of these points corresponds to a different feature. So for example, we have fire hydrants. Tobies are a New Zealand term for a water valve. So if you hear me saying that or see it in the data, that's what they are. Street lights, floodlights, stormwater grates, and trees. Next up, for the water supply line, so this one's a little more involved. So this is a utility pipe. So in this case, we have nominal diameter as an attribute. We also have pipe depth in centimeters. We have pipe thickness in millimeters. External diameter also in millimeters. And we also have pipe matière, which is short for pipe material. So that's going to be like what the pipe is made out of. Next up, we have the wastewater pipe. So much of the same things here, nominal diameter, depth, thickness. We also have external diameter here, pipe material, length, and also this one isn't in the data set. I've just added this myself. We'll be using this for later to demonstrate one of the other rule sets in Visualization Manager, but I've added a pipe age variable or sorry, attribute here. And what this does, it's basically just showing like how old these pipes are. And lastly, we have the electrical network. So this is an electrical line. So not as much data here as the pipe. So we have what it is, its diameter, and its depth. So assuming your data is like this, or assuming you have data similar to this, what we can then do is I can then open up SiteVision Visualization Manager right here. So the app is very simple. It is literally just one screen. And what you can do is from here, we can create a new rules file. So I will go ahead and do that. And what we have right here is we have 3 different types of rules and 2 different kinds of styles. So we have feature class rules, attribute rules, discrete rules, and point and line styles. So how we'll do this is I will basically start by creating some line styles. So that way, when we have our line data here, so our pipes and our electrical network line, there's a way we can determine how those are shown in SiteVision once we have those in. So what I'll do is I will create the line style for the waste pipe. So what I like to do here is I like to make sure I know what it is. So pipe waste. You'll see the reason why I do this particular thing later. And what I'll do is I will set this to be a pipe. So if I set it to be a pipe here and I use this particular line style on one of these pipes, then SiteVision will render it as a pipe and not a line. And what I can do is from here, I can also set the color. So let's say, for example, for this one, I want my waste pipe to be navy colored. Next up, I want a different color for my water line. So I'm going to call this pipe water. And what you can do is you can hit this big plus button here to create new rules. And we'll explain these buttons when they come into the feature class rule set. But for now, you can just focus on just creating your styles. So we will also make this a water pipe, define it as a pipe. And this time we'll make this one a slightly lighter blue. Lastly, we'll also make a electrical line for our electrical network. This one we'll leave as a line. And for this one, let's make this red. Perfect. So now we have our line styles. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into starting to define our point styles. So if you remember from here earlier, if we open our attribute table here, we have all of these different feature types. And what we're going to do is later on, we're going to be assigning every one of these feature types to a different SketchUp model, because this is actually one of the capabilities that a SiteVision Visualization Manager can do. So for this one, it's important to match the case and also match the spelling of the feature type itself. And what I'll do, for example, is I'll start. So I will define what a hydrant is. And From here, you can choose what sort of symbol file it looks like. So by default, SiteVision would render these points as just circular spheres. But since we're here, we can choose what we want. So let's say for these ones, for this fire hydrant model, I will use the fire hydrant.sketchup.skp file. Next one, for the Toby, so for the water valve, I will use a water valve SketchUp model. Then for the next one, for the street lights, oh, whoops, sorry. For the street light, make sure I match the spelling and make sure the space and the case match. Go in here. No, this is in a tree. We will go into light pole. Perfect. Next up, we will do floodlight. So we're going to define, we'll be defining every feature class, every different feature type in here. What I'll then be doing here is I will also make this a light pole, but oh, sorry, that's not a light pole. This is a light pole, but to differentiate it from the street light, I will make it bigger. So what you can do here is with the scale, this is a relative option. So if I put scale of 1, it will scale as the normal height in the SketchUp model. Whereas if I make it say scale 1.5, then every measurement will be 1.5 times bigger. So this is useful for like making models bigger, smaller, depending on like how they're actually sized in the real world. So to differentiate those while I'm using SiteVision, I'm going to do that. Finishing it off, I will create a different thing for the tree. And all of these, and another thing too, is all of these symbol files, what's already on this menu is already built into SiteVision. So you're pretty confident if I select any of these. So for example, this is a broadleaf oak tree. If you select these here and put these into Trimble Connect with your SiteVision file, SiteVision, like in the app data itself on your phone, already has the SketchUp files for all of these. So you don't need to worry about like adding in any. But if you want to, we can add custom ones, but I'll explain how to do that later in this presentation. Lastly, we'll also finish off with adding stormwater grate. So if I do type that in, I will then define this as a storm manhole.sketchup file, no scaling. So now from here, we have all of our styles. So if we just left it here and just exported this rules file, nothing would happen in our SiteVision because we haven't linked these to our feature classes that we have here on the left, or our attributes by that point too. So first off, what we'll do is we'll start with our feature classes. So what a feature class rule is it's basically a rule that defines how an entire feature class is going to look. So for example, if I made a water supply feature line, then I could determine how the entire water supply feature class will look. So to do that, we'll start. Again, case and spelling are important here. So I will say if this equals water supply, and there's a lot of different options here for that. So you could do either contains. So if we did, for example, contains water, then it could apply to both water points, water supply, and wastewater because they all contain the word water. But since we want to be specific here, let's just say equals. For geometry heights, so this is especially important if you're dealing with utility data. So by default, the geometry heights are based off the ground. However, if your heights are absolute instead of relative, like let's say they're measured from sea level or instead of from below the ground, you could say up to what point on the pipe is measured. So either the pipe invert, top, bottom, or center line of pipe. In the case of our data, this is all measured. This is all measured from the ground, so we'll just leave it at that. And from here, this is the display style. So I can choose which one of my line styles this is going to work on. So in this case, for the sorry, that shouldn't be water points. That should be water supply. And in this case, for the display style, this is going to be our water line. So I want it to display with our water style. And you'll see here, this is the reason why I made the capital pipe here. So they'll all be together in the drop-down menu. So it's a lot easier to find. So if I do pipe water, so now Now, if I export this, my water supply line in SiteVision will look like a aqua colored pipe. And lastly, there's also the visible attributes. So what this does is by default, you can set the layer itself to be visible or invisible when you first load it into SiteVision. So this is particularly useful if you're looking at a big GIS file and you want to only see specific parts of it to start with, because otherwise if you have too many GIS files or too much data open in SiteVision at any one time, it could cause your performance to slightly degrade. So taking out the stuff you don't see here is definitely a good way to start that off. Next up, I will repeat this with the other pipe. So I will call this wastewater. Again, set this to ground because that's how the data itself is set. For the display style, I will set this to our waste pipe. I will also keep this visible. And then lastly, I will also select our elect network, so our electrical network, set the geometry heights to the ground, and then display style, I will set this to, where are we? Set this to our electrical line. So now we have all three of our line feature classes defined. And what we can also do is this is where these three buttons will come in. So let's say for example, I want to make a rule for if there is new GIS data on here. So let's say there's something that isn't water supply, wastewater, or electrical network. Like let's say there's a new line and we want to figure out how that's defined. So what I can do is I can go into my feature class, take this equals drop-down menu, and instead say matches everything. So what this will do is if your data doesn't match, if the data in the GIS doesn't match water supply, wastewater, or electrical network, this is sort of going to be what the default is. So by default, let's say if there is no definition available, we will just render these as the white line visible too. And what we can do here is we can also show you one of the rules of SiteVision Visualization Manager, which is these buttons right here. So what I can do here is if I hit this button, it'll basically change the order that the rules are applied in. So by default, every rule gets applied from the top down. So for example, the water supply rule will apply first, then wastewater, then electrical network, then matches everything. So the reason why, so what would happen is if this was all the way up, so let's say if I put this all the way up here, then what would happen is because the first rule essentially says match everything to be white, then everything would be white by default and all of these other rules wouldn't apply, only because this one's first. But since we put this last in the feature class rules, this will only apply if all the other data doesn't satisfy this rule first, doesn't satisfy this rule first, and doesn't satisfy this rule first. All right. Next up, we will go into our attribute rules. So this is where a lot of the more specific, this is where we're starting to get a little more specific in our styling. So what attribute rules will do is they will apply different rule sets based on attributes in a feature class rather than just the entire feature class itself. So for example, for this one, I will set our feature types. So for example, for our point data, I will set those points to mirror all of these point styles that we made earlier. What I'll do is I will again match case and spelling. So if this equals feature type on any feature class, since, or we could say on a specific feature class, let's say water points. For this one, you can set these attribute rules to apply to any feature class or just on a specific feature class. In my experience, it's better to be more specific rather than be more wide, just in case if you have rules that spill over to any feature class, then you might have some unexpected behavior sometimes with rules applying where you don't want them to be. So now that we have it specified to only act on this feature class, I can say my attribute, and what I'll do is I will say feature display style. So now what this rule will do is it will check the feature type attribute, of each one of these. And if it matches, and if the attribute matches the name of one of the point styles, it will use that point style. So that's for the points, but it's not just for the points too. We can also apply this for the pipes as well. So for example, if I open up one of the water supply ones, you can see we also have a defined depth attribute here. So this is 240 centimeters in this case. So what I'll do is I will say if attribute equals depth on any feature class, since this particular attribute is on multiple feature classes, so it's on our wastewater, it's on our electrical network too. Open that back up. I will say for this one, this is going to be the depth of our top of the pipe. And units are really important here because otherwise these pipes are going to be a lot deeper or a lot shallower than you initially imagined. So I will say top of pipe in centimeters. And the way, and for the top of the, and for the way the depth's calculated from the feature class right here. So because we said our geometry heights are based off the ground by default, then this will apply from the ground. As you can see here, there's also a lot of different options. So we also have pipe, we also have for each one, you can measure from the invert, top, bottom, or center line. And you can also measure either depth or elevation. So that will be from sea level. Next up, we also, in these ones, we also have a nominal diameter attribute. This is also on all the other, this is also on the wastewater one. So if I open up there, our nominal diameter attribute. And what I'll do here is I will say in this one, if it matches nominal diameter on any feature class, since we want this to apply to all our features, this will be our pipe internal diameter in millimeters. And another important thing to keep in mind here is that once you define any diameter attribute on a pipe or on any line class, they will automatically render as pipes in SiteVision. So even though we have display styles that that specifically say we want these to render as pipes, you don't necessarily need to do that. You could just have pipe internal diameter here. However, that's not really recommended. So what you'd want to have is you want to have both the internal diameter and the line style that says this is a pipe as well, just to have some extra redundancy on there. Next up, we also have a pipe thickness attribute. And what we'll do here is I will create another rule. And if it equals thickness on any feature class, I will specify that to be pipe thickness. Pipe thickness, this is also in millimeters. And another thing to note here is, especially particularly with pipes, is even though some of these have, even though there is an external diameter attribute, the only way to get a pipe with an internal wall rendered in SiteVision is to have both a diameter and a thickness. So if I just did an attribute rule for internal diameter or nominal diameter, and I did another attribute rule for external diameter, it will only show the external wall, and there won't be any internal wall thickness. So you have to have a diameter and a thickness just to make that work. Where are we? All right, perfect. And after that, I will go into our discrete rules. So discrete rules is sort of our most powerful way of defining rules, because what this is it's a combination of attribute rules and feature class rules. So I can define an attribute rule on a certain feature class, and I can also specify when the value is equal to something. So instead of just checking what the value is, period, you can also check maybe if it's greater than something, less than something. And in this particular case, this is why I created this pipe age attribute here, because we're actually going to be using that to create a discrete rule. So what we're going to do is, since when attribute equals pipe underscore age on this specific feature class, again, we want to err towards the more specific side rather than being more general, just so we don't get any rules conflicts down the line. And when the value of these is, let's say, greater than 10, I want the entire thing to be red. Then I will also define another rule, sort of similar, pipe underscore age on the specific feature class of wastewater, but then this time less than 10. And what I'll do here is if the pipe is less than 10 years old, I will call it blue. So this one's going to be safe. And what will happen here is this is also a good chance to talk about how rules, the order of which rules are applied. So in this case, since I defined these two specific discrete rules, these will take priority over the feature class rules of what the wastewater should look like. So what will happen is in SiteVision, if I had these two discrete rules loaded into my rules files, the wastewater pipelines would render as either red or blue first, depending on the discrete rules. Then they would render their diameter, thickness, and depth based on the attribute rules. Then after that, they would render into their default feature class rules. So that's sort of the rules order of how they're applied in SiteVision. And what'll happen is if there are conflicts in these rules, so like let's say if you have a discrete rule that sort of matches your attribute rule, or like those two are in conflict with each other, they both target the same thing. Usually the discrete rule will apply first, or whatever the first matching rule is. So in this particular case, we will leave these here, but if you don't want to have these rules show up in your if you don't want to have these rules show up in your SiteVision, what you can do is just hit the delete button right here, and those will delete the rules so you don't have to deal with them. And now that we've got most of our attributes in here, what I'll then do is I will file save as. And these are examples of some of the rules. So what I'll do is I will call this, let's say, a working rule set .rules.json. Save that. So now this is saved. And from here, what we'll do is we will move into, before we export from SiteVision, I'll also show you a couple of other features of the Visualization Manager itself. So when I mentioned before that we could put custom symbols in here, what you can do is you can take different SketchUp files, either you make them yourself or you can download them from the 3D warehouse. And you need to put them in two places so that they can show up in SiteVision properly. So what I'll do is I will quickly exit ArcMap in this case. I'll open open a folder. And so for one, we have our finished working rule set JSON file here, but I also have this particular SketchUp model of a traffic cone. So what I'll do is since I want this to be in SiteVision Visualization Manager, since I want some of my points to look like that, like for example, what I will do is I will save this, close this for now, and I will copy this, and the exact path may change depending on your computer. Sometimes it's in program files, sometimes it's in program files x86. In this case, it's x86. I will scroll down to Trimble SiteVision Visualization Manager, go into symbols, and as you can see, here are all the symbols that you saw in the drop-down menu from the SiteVision Visualization Manager earlier. Now, what you have to be careful with symbols like these, I will just paste this in quickly. You will have to provide admin permission. What you'll have to be careful with with loading custom symbols into SiteVision is that you don't want to have very complex symbols, or you don't want to have symbols that are very like complex, either like, how was it, like spatially, or just have a lot of moving parts or a lot of detail in them. Because otherwise, if you have data that spans a lot of that has a lot of that same point in there, it could cause performance to lag quite a bit. And another thing to do with SketchUp models, particularly, the origin of the SketchUp model will basically determine the insertion point of that SketchUp model when it replaces the point. So if, for example, if you have a point that goes underground, if you have a model that goes underground, you have to make sure the origin of the model is at the very top of the model. So then that way it'll render going below the ground. Same otherwise for going up as well. All right, so this was the first place. The second place is I actually have my phone that I use with SiteVision put in here. I will go in here, go into Trimble, SiteVision AR, and symbols. And again, you'll also see all the same models here again. So I will paste this in here. So now that if I open up SiteVision Visualization Manager again, open that up. Here, so if I open up Visualization Manager again, and I go into my point styles, I can open up my symbol files, and if I scroll down, you can now see the traffic cone is in there. So once you have it selected here and you have it in both the places, then that's the way you can get your custom styles into SiteVision as well. All right, so what I'll do is I will open our working rule set again, so you could just take a quick look at everything. So now we are, if I open up ArcMap again, now we are essentially done with our work for the SiteVision for the SiteVision rule set for this particular one. Now, in this case, we went over all the feature class rules, all the attribute rules, and all the discrete rules. But in your case, depending on what your data is or what your data contains, you don't have to necessarily have all three rules. Like, for example, if you're perfectly fine having just feature class rules and attribute rules, that's totally fine. The visualization manager will still work. Likewise, if you have nothing but discrete rules, that will also work too. You don't need to add any more rules if you don't need them. So what I'll then do is I will go into Trimble Connect. So this is one of the ways to upload the rules data. So what I'll do is I will go back into here, SiteVision Visualization Manager, and my working rule set. So one of the ways to upload these rules config files, or these rules files, is to just drag and drop them into Trimble Connect. And once that's there, as long as they're in the same folder, and they don't need to have the same name too, as long as they're in the same folder, whenever I open this particular data set in SiteVision, it will use this particular rules file. Now, another thing to keep in mind is you can actually have multiple rules files per model. But what will happen is, let's say for example, like I just put in one of these other sample rule sets into Connect here. Now what will happen is, since I have multiple rules files, the rules files will apply alphabetically. So for this particular model, all the rules in this particular JSON file will happen first. Then once that's then for anything that this didn't catch, it will go over to working rule set, or the one we made. So in this case, we will delete this one since we don't really need it. And the other way to do this is you can also put these onto the phone directly. So what I'll do is I will copy this here, go back to my SiteVision phone. And the way to put these into your phone is to go into Trimble, SiteVision AR again. This time go into config. And I can copy paste my rules into here. So what this will then do is for the model that I'm for this specific model, since I defined those rules, the rules, if I didn't also if I didn't have this particular JSON file, then the rules will come from the phone itself. But since I do have a rules file in Connect, the one on Trimble Connect will take precedence over the rules file that I have on the phone. So what this means in like practical purposes is what you can do is you can have more general rules files. So like, let's say if you're working for a utility company and you really want to make sure all your water lines are blue, all your power lines are red, um, general rules files can go in the phone. Whereas if you're working on specific projects that have specific specific colorings or line or styles for their data, then the rule set on Trimble Connect will take over for that instead. So normally at this point, I would go outside and show you what these look like in SiteVision, but since we're all cooped up inside right now, I can also just sort of show you what each different attribute will end up looking like in SiteVision. So if I just present this quickly. So what you can see here, this is the layer visibility on the feature class. So if you remember that toggle for visibility on off, if I had those off, then what you'd see is when you open the model in SiteVision to begin with, these particular layers are invisible by default. So you don't have to, so it's not like when you have to open it, you have to disable every layer to start with. You no longer have to do that if you have the rules file. Next up, oh, I forgot to mention this. This is attribute visibility. So like the feature class visibility, if you have attributes, they also have the visibility property here. If I disable those or enable those, what can happen is if I tap on anything in the model to display its attributes, those attributes just won't be there. So this is particularly useful if you're dealing with like really big GIS data or even stuff like IFC files, which tend to have a lot of attribute data associated with them, and you only want to see like the relevant ones. That's a good way to sort of cut through all of that. Next up are line styles. So these are our attribute rules. So in this case, what they did here was they define what colors the line should be, so yellow, blue, and red. And by default, if you don't do that, SiteVision will only render them as random colors. But since you have this, it will take the rules file that you use, those attribute rules, and show them as what they're intended to be. Next up for point styles, this is the really cool one. So before, what you normally see is you just see the line, and you'd also just see the point there. In the after shot, a lot of people don't really catch this the first time you look at it. That's a virtual tree. So that's the broadleaf oak model from the SketchUp file. And what we did was because we set our attribute rules to have our feature type for the points equal to the tree, now the tree is going to be showing here. And you can also see here this here is another SketchUp model from the same area as well. The big one here, defining pipes for our attribute rules. Since we defined our depth here, so we have our depth, and we all set where our geometry heights are based from. What you can see here is what was traditionally what would normally show up as a 2D data set actually became 3D with a depth, and you can see the line, and you can also see the pipe that was rendered here. So what this will do is if you do have 2D data, as long as you define a depth, either relative or absolute, and you make sure you know where the depth is measured to and where it's measured from, then you can essentially sort of turn your 2D data into 3D data. But another Another sort of drawback of this is once you turn 2D data into 3D data using the visualization manager, you can no longer drape this over a 3D surface. So just keep those interactions in mind. Next up, this is the example of our pipe age attributes. So what you can see here is because this was a discrete rule, it took precedence over all the other attribute and feature class rules. So that's why these pipes are only blue and red. But what you can then see is from here, the pipes used to be random colors, but now they are colored according to the value of their attribute function. All right. And that's really it for the SiteVision Visualization Manager. I'd encourage you to download this from the Trimble SiteVision site. It's free. You can have a play around with it and see how your data looks in SiteVision. In addition to that, we also have additional resources available to help, to help assist you in like learn for how to use SiteVision and how to use the visualization manager especially. So as before, you saw the sitevision.trimble.com website. So that's how you can see how SiteVision can work in your industry. Lots of frequently asked questions, user guides. We also have the geospatial specific page for SiteVision if you're in that particular industry. We also have the SiteVision YouTube channel. You don't have to, if you can't click this link, just search up Trimble SiteVision on YouTube. We have a full video tutorial series, data preparation guides, and certain use case videos on how SiteVision is presented. Then for specifically for the visualization manager and just general SiteVision support, there is also the SiteVision support page. In addition to the visualization manager documentation, we also have a full data preparation guide. So I just wanted to highlight this during this webinar. It's not really relevant to the visualization manager, but a lot of the support concerns we get about SiteVision are concerned about how data is prepared, or how should I change my data to work in SiteVision. So this particular guide and all of these submenus work particularly well if you are looking to present SiteVision data from a variety of different formats: SketchUps, IFCs, Trimble Business Center, Bentley I models, ESRI data. And specifically, there's also a full written guide on how to use the visualization manager here, just in case you want to take a look at the instructions in a different way. And with that, that will be it from me. So I assume there's probably a lot of questions. I haven't been keeping track of that, but Adam, what kind of questions do we have so far?
Yeah, great, Miko. That was really excellent, informative presentation. We've got a couple of very good questions. So one question here is, how do you define the height when the pipe has a slope? Can you answer to that, Miko?
Okay, so when the pipe has a slope, what the pipe will do is it will, so if you have the ground by default, then it will just assuming you have all of that defined in your GIS data, then the depth of the pipe will be determined by the slope. So even if it goes down, the height will sort of go down with that. If you want to avoid that, then I would suggest probably going for an absolute elevation instead. So like you could measure from the top of sea level going up instead of measuring down, and that way it will the height of the pipe will stay fixed.
So in other words, Miko, if you've defined it in your GIS, then when you import the model, it should import the slope of that pipe, right?
Should, yes.
Okay, okay, great. Thanks, Miko. Here's another one. Is there a way to view the .skp or the SketchUp model in the SiteVision visualization Manager, Miko? Or do you have to
As
only see it in either SketchUp or can you view it in the Visualization Manager?
So right now, no, you can't. You can only choose what model it's going to be from the visualization manager, but you can't necessarily view what the model itself looks like. For that, you will need to in just view it in SketchUp specifically.
Okay, great.
Mhm.
Another one, does this rule set that you worked through, Miko, does it work with the data other than a shapefile? So for instance, something exported from TBC, SiteVision AR?
So for this particular rule set, it won't work with TBC data, but if you do want sort of this level of control in TBC, you can use the site you can control that using the SiteVision AR exporter. So from there, as of SiteVision 1.10, I think, if you have colors in your TBC model, those will carry through into SiteVision itself from the AR exporter. But
Okay,
in this case, for Visualization Manager, this is mainly for GIS data, so shapefiles, geodatabases. We've also had some people work using this with other feature class-based models such as IFCs, but we haven't really tested that too much yet here.
okay, okay,
Mhm.
great. Um, a general comment here, Miko, is it looks like models created using SketchUp version 20.x is not recognized by SiteVision, is that right?
20.x, so that would be like SketchUp 2020, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, we've had a couple of people run into that too. So to avoid that from happening, because I'm not super sure why it happens either. If you're downloading your models or exporting your models from SketchUp, I would use SketchUp 2018 or 2019 instead, and that should fix the problem, and the models should show.
okay. That's great. Thanks, Miko.
All
Here's
right.
another one. Um, just someone's comment on your presentation that you were using shapefiles. Can you also use geodatabase and feature
Yes.
class as well? Will that work?
Yes, they should. They should work because as long as they're feature classes here with attributes, then this will catch all of those.
Okay, okay. Great. And then somebody was noticing in your presentation, Miko, just wondering, how did you get the project up on Connect? Did you do that from ArcMap using the Teraflex add-in, or did you just have a model in Connect?
All right, so is it just about getting shape files into Connect, like period?
Yeah, I think what
All
they're
right.
wondering is, how did you get the project that you displayed in Connect there? If you can just maybe briefly describe or go back to your Connect screen where you were um,
All right, sounds good.
demoing, if that makes sense.
So what you can do where are we? For getting those shape file models into Trimble Connect, what you can do is since shape files have a lot of different files in them, what you can do is if you zip up the folder containing all the different parts of the shapefile model, you can take that zip folder and upload that to Trimble Connect. And then from there, Connect will recognize that yes is the shapefile and render everything properly.
Okay,
Yeah. So yeah, for that you can just like use the for that you can just use like the zip function on your computer. I use 7-zip personally. You can just that's a free software you can download online. As long as you
okay.
zip that up and put it in here, everything should show normally.
So what you're showing here is you would zip that shapefile, let's say for instance for this project, into this project called Survey Project
Mhm.
WCO, right?
And
Okay.
yeah, and then I would put it, and then within the survey project WCO, because this is the main project, I have
Yeah.
a folder, well, specifically for this webinar, but I have a folder here where I put both the shapefile as a zip and the rules file.
Okay.
Hmm.
Okay, that's great. Um, Miko, I think that looks like everything. There was another general question put out there just about when you were running through the side by side and you had the table up and the SiteVision Visualization Manager,
Right.
the comment just around or question around is case sensitive and spelling
Mhm.
necessary? And I think you implied that both case sensitive and spelling are necessary. That's why you had the table up and the SiteVision Visualization Manager side by side, right?
Yes. So in this case, yes, space like spelling and case is necessary. So for this, like that's why I had both. That's why I had both these up. That's why, like during the presentation, I was saying like we gotta match our attributes to our feature class
Yeah,
name, because otherwise, if, for example, if this was spelled like this, this entire rule would not apply because because the visualization manager and site vision is looking for water supply instead of water
yeah.
supply. So that's why we want to make sure that doesn't happen.
Okay. Yeah, so really important you pay attention to the case sensitivity and the spelling that originates from that table of the shapefile or feature class.
Right.
That's great. Okay.
Okay.
I think that's it, Miko, on the questions from our audience.
All right.
So
Cool.
that was really great. Thanks again, Miko, for presenting this. This should help a lot of our customers and dealers with the Site Vision and Visualization Manager there.
All
Um,
right.
yeah, I want to thank everybody for joining. That was really excellent webinar. And Miko, thanks for presenting. I hope you all enjoyed that. And we look forward to future webinars with you all. Thanks again.
All right. And thanks again for listening in too.
Miko, can you stop that then?
Yep. Got it.
Thanks.
All right.